he went to his doctor, and he had his doctor draw the exact position of his heart on his shirt, presumably so he could more efficaciously off himself. But anyway, so. But the end of the poem sort of revises that a little bit, tries to find some measure of hope.
Recovering some of his lost works, which you've embodied here as a woman, in a sense?
Yeah, maybe. Or, I don't know. Mark Strand has this great poem called My Name, and it ends with that line, the silence from which I have come and to which I will go. We were just talking about archetypes. How much does that, if I say the word mother, does that sort of resonate with the similar kind of idea?
I mean, the idea of the mother is going to it'll differ slightly for various people, but everyone has this idea of like the perfect mother, who I think you've really captured quite powerfully in this poem. She's really like nurturing this child who's in a terribly confused state in the first half. A really beautiful and really devastating way of explaining the house being like torn apart by soldiers. That moved me.
Thank you.
Significantly. But
yeah, I mean, I'm interested in these. My students know this from the classes that I teach that are not about poetry. I've been teaching a class for 7 years now here at Manhattanville that I call the literature of war, but really it's a way to talk about novels and short stories and sometimes poems and films that are interested, and set during a time of war or responding to it, but also are interested in fracturing narrative, fracturing a story, breaking a story up.
Which I've noticed you've done here. You've provided two separate narratives, the meditations on Todd Stotter's photograph and then also on the young poets.
Yeah, I'm really interested. I mean, first of all, right, why would you do that? If I were sitting here and telling you some story, not on the page, but just recounting it, and I started to get a little bit scatterbrained, I mean, that would say something about my state of mind, which maybe the poem is attempting to communicate, or how difficult it is at that moment in history, personal history, cultural history, to communicate something in a linear fashion. I'm also very interested in the kinds of poems, I always have been, those kinds of poems that introduce little narrative snippets or motifs, nod to them, go elsewhere, come back to them, and see how much things have changed when you let that narrative just kind of flow under the surface for a while and pop up somewhere else.
Yeah, and I've noticed you have, I think, 3 separate dialogues going on here, and of course the Sarajevo, and then on top of the young poet who's trying to reconcile with his loss. We've also got someone who's like in their backyard who seems to be the sticking point for both of these events. Was there any impetus for his like reach for these 2 events? Like,
I mean, it's interesting to think about that way, isn't it? This somebody sort of lying down in this this yard or this field and reaching backwards and reaching forward, and his body, his life is the only thing that might bring them together.
Right.
Isn't that the case? Isn't that the case with all of us? That's what you're doing. You're lying in a field somewhere trying to yoke together the past, the present, and the future. Sure.
Yeah, this very reminds me of 2 works that I've read recently, actually. Just the very fact that you can like grab things from different times in history, connect them through a similar narrative thread reminds me of Cloud Atlas by David Mitchell.
Oh, sure, yeah.
And I think I do see a lot of that in this one. I don't think that was what you were going for.
No, but you're right in that it seems like a similar kind of motivation to show
connected by like an emotional reality. Of the moments.
Right, there's a subjectivity that binds them. But to show how difficult it is, we kind of take it for granted. It might be easy to put a story together, but I mean, try to get home at the end of the day and tell somebody how your day was, and you immediately think, how am I going to communicate this? How am I going to, put pieces together to make some sort of meaningful...
It was bad.
Right, yeah, you're right. It's one thing you could do, right? You say, terrible or good. Or try to weave things together and allow the person to figure it out for him or herself.
Yeah, because then we can also go with those scattered narratives. Well, my dog ran away and the car broke down, etc., etc. So,
Yeah. So you put those two things in a poem. My dog ran away and I won the lottery. But it's like, as soon as I say that, though, Mike, right? My dog ran away and I won the lottery. Someone might be thinking, putting those things together in some fashion, right? Or are you saying that maybe your dog running away was the cause of your winning, right? Call that post hoc ergo propter hoc. But right. So in other words, to encounter something as a reader, you are going to try to make those connections. I'm of course not trying to frustrate any readers, but
Right.
trying to make the reader aware, self-conscious of that process of what you're doing and how you're trying to put things together.
Very
Because it's the same as mine, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And of course, we all grab our own personal resources for these to explain our own narratives. And yeah, this. Can you repeat that concept again? Post hoc ergo hoc.
Post hoc ergo propter hoc, right? It just means it's Latin, right? So after this, therefore, because of this. It's like, yeah, that example would be, it's a logical fallacy, right? So I lost, my dog ran away and I won the lottery. Therefore, when dogs run away, you're going to win the lottery. It looks silly when you articulate it that way, but we do that a lot. Now, I'm not trying to, send up all logical fallacies because it's a portrait of how we think. So they can have a place in a poem. Might not have a place in a mathematical proof. Might not have a place in a philosophical argument.
But in our minds, that makes perfect sense. Like, you're looking for a way to make sense of everything.
Yeah.
Reminds me a lot of. Have you read Wind Up Bird Chronicle by Haruki Murakami?
I haven't, no.
The entire chain of events in this story is set. It's set in motion really by this guy realizing his cat hasn't come home in a few days.
Okay, sure.
And then his life totally changes, and within 2 years, he's in a totally different place.
Yeah.
From where
Yeah, that's the way we think. It's the way we think. And sometimes it's good, and sometimes it helps us, and you know this. I mean, but sometimes it's how you can get into a lot of trouble, blaming the wrong people, for example.
Exactly.
Sometimes you get in trouble blaming yourself when you shouldn't.
Yeah, and who can blame any of the people in this poem?
Yeah.
They're in bad states. But do you have something else you'd like to read?
Yeah, sure. We were just talking about war, and since I'm doing this here at Manhattanville, and I'm reading here today, and I'll be reading tomorrow, I mentioned I teach this class that I call The Literature of War. This is a poem that mentions the Great War, the First World War. Yeah, I don't want to get into sort of what appeals to me. It's a terrible way of putting it, but what I find terrifyingly fascinating about that moment in history. But I'll just sort of say that by way of introduction. This is a poem that is set at that moment in European history. Called Night Music, Serenade. The woman dozes at the table. Her hair shifts in the dust, like a mare bedding down in an orchard. The man wanders in, offers his spurs to the dishwater. He thinks of her love, a child's Bible in the attic. He doesn't know her sadness from the dull blade of the harvester behind the White House, but he knows where she goes. How when she walks, she holds the long branches of her garden up to her lost son's tongues, like slim galls on the road to Caesar. October, her hands smell of cider and blossoms, a liturgy of the sacred ill. There are coins in a desk in a cellar, the voices of boys and their breaking, like foals in a stream in the hills. In the fog, he bows down to sniff her, heavy with wine from the mountains, running his glove on her collar, thin in his best dress wool. And the great war rocks back astonished, clasping its 2 hands of fire to the ash of its opening mouth.
Very nice.
Thank you. I love the idea of the war being shocked by an act of tenderness.
Yeah, of course, there are these just very personal moments of life, love, anything that are still going on even when we think of the world in these broader historical contexts. Like, we'll always remember the way that one person made us feel, and we might not necessarily care about whatever the backdrop to the historical context.